I kind of asked that today because we talk about having a guest. We have a special guest speaker today. He was also our special guest cajon player, which we decided about 45 minutes ago. But it was a lot of fun. We have a friend, James McMahon, is here visiting us today from Kansas City. He came up a couple days ago and led a leadership retreat for the leaders here at Hometown, and it was an awesome, awesome time for us to be together and grow together and just have somebody else help us kind of navigate through a lot of things. Ryan, Julie, Stacy, and I met him during church plant training. He and his wife facilitated one of our courses to help us get ready to church plant. So it was super cool to get to bring him back up here for the retreat. And then we said, hey, would you be willing to share with us Sunday morning? And he said, yeah, he would love to. So please give a warm hometown welcome to James McMahon.
Thank you for having me, seriously. What are there parameters on your camera of like how far I can and cannot wander? Okay, cool. Sometimes I'll like, when I'm speaking somewhere, I'll like walk and they're like, whoa, back up, you're now off camera. So everywhere has their own rules of like where you operate within, and so just wanting to be attentive to that. Thank you for having me. I live in Kansas City where I have a therapy practice, so one of the expressions of my life is that as a licensed marriage and family therapist. But I've been a fourscore pastor with my wife for a decade and a half. I've done a lot of different things. But ultimately, if I could say like the thematic element of what I do, what I love to do, what I try to do, is to create space for brave relationship. I think in this world, the journey that we are on, there is no way to walk forward in community without it being difficult and risky and challenging. And I think the invitation for us is to allow the Spirit to continue to make us more brave. And so in all of the contexts that I live in, that I work in, that I walk in, my hope is that we would find ourselves encouraged to take some brave steps, to become more brave, to allow the Spirit to fill us with greater bravery. And I think particularly today is Pentecost Sunday for those of you who follow the liturgical calendar, or if that's a background or thing that you came from. But even as we engage today in our time, I just pray that the Spirit would enliven our souls, would deepen our groundedness in His presence, and would allow us to walk with a little bit more bravery. So Jesus, as we walk together today in this space and in this way, would you speak? Would you encourage? Would you give us each a moment with you? In a way that only you can. Jesus, would you still so many of the places, even in myself, that I carry in this morning, that I can pay attention to your voice and to your presence, to what you are doing in me, to what you are doing in those around me, to what you're doing in this place, in this people, in this city. Jesus, we pray this in your name. Amen. So this morning, I just want to walk together through a story. I love stories. I have two little girls at home who are learning the art of storytelling, and sometimes it is phenomenal, and sometimes I have no idea what is happening in the story. But one of the things that I love about stories is how often the stories aren't just about themselves. We talked a little bit about this weekend that a story, a piece of art, a song, that there is an element of beauty in the form itself and in what it is. But the greatest songs and the greatest pieces of art and the greatest stories are always stories and art and songs that actually draw us somewhere even beyond that open our imagination, that allow us to see things and experiencing things from a lot of different places. If you're into art, you've been at a museum, and there's a lot of art around here, there are certain pieces of art that we'll look at and we'll just kind of wander through, and then there'll be some where we just stop. Right? And for whatever reason, that piece of art, or we're listening to a playlist, and we're just kind of driving along and listening, and then a certain song comes on, and it like stops us. And it impacts us in ways because there's something about the beauty within art, within story, that is this invitation to even to see what is beyond. And when I think about that, I think about the creativity of God to do that. That there's something that we can look at that also invites us to look beyond. And so we're going to look at a story today, which is one of my favorite stories. And part of the reason it's my favorite story is because there's so many different things that I see when I sit in the story and when I look at the story. And I'll read it, and then I'll go a little while without reading it, and then I'll read it again, and I'll stop and go like, oh man, yeah, let me think about that. Let me look at that. Let me take that beyond. So I pray that as we look at the story, that God would do that for us, that he'll allow us to imagine some things and to see some things in the story. So if you will pull up, hey, look at you being ahead of me here. I love this. Well done. This is a story out of the Gospel of Mark, and I'm just going to read it, and then we're going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to read it again and do some imagining with it. So this story that picks up in Mark chapter 10, verse 46, where the story says, they came to Jericho, they being Jesus, his disciples, a whole lot of people that came in their camp. They came to Jericho, and as he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and he came to Jesus, and then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "Teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. In this story, some of the context is this is a story that takes place a little bit later in Jesus' ministry. Actually, as he has set his face to Jerusalem, as he and his disciples are on their way to what will ultimately lead to his death, he's actually already had some conversations with the disciples saying, hey, the place that we're going, it's not going to go well for me. I'm going to die. That there's some of these conversations about what is lying ahead have already been taking place, and Jesus continues his ministry in the direction of Jerusalem. And so they have come into Jericho. Things have happened. They're on their way out of Jericho, making their way to Jesus, and that's where the story takes place. And I want to give you two things to hold in mind as we're going to read the story and imagine the story together. And these are two things that sit at the foundation of how I understand the way that God has made us and the tension that we sit in as people who try to follow Jesus. And the first is that we are fundamentally created for connection with God and connection with one another. And this comes out a lot about, you read Genesis chapter 2 in particular, where God placed Adam in the garden to be in union and in connection and living in paradise with God. And there's a moment where God said, actually, I've made you to be connected with other humans too. And he created Eve. From the beginning, we're actually made to live in connection. And God has also created us with a biological tendency to protect ourselves when things get risky. Some of us are familiar with the language of the fight, flight, freeze response, that when something happens, when we get unsettled, like we all respond in different ways because there's something in us that says, while I am made for connection, I'm also biologically wired to protect myself when things get risky. And God made us with both of those. The challenge is moving from a place in a moment where it feels risky and we protect ourselves into a place where we're able to then walk in connection with each other. And I actually think when I follow my own journey of discipleship and growth with Jesus, and when I walk with others, I would actually suggest that maturity for us as Christians is to be able to walk with that tension, to be able to pay attention to these moments where we step into a spot where we actually start to protect ourselves because something is dangerous, and we lose connection with those around us, and we lose connection with God in the invitation to return to a place of connection. That sits underneath everything that I do, everything that I see, the way that I watch relationships. And I want us to hold that in mind as we're going to read this story again. And I want to invite you, as you read it, just to pay attention to the story, to the characters in the story, to the different people in the story, to what is going on in the story. So we're going to read it one more time. Will you lead us through that? Okay. So as Jesus and his disciples, they came to Jericho. And as he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, and just allow yourself to actually picture this. Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, was a blind beggar, and he was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth that was walking through, he began to shout out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me, sitting by the road. Jesus, Jesus, have mercy on me. Many who were around Jesus, who were walking with Jesus, sternly ordered him to be quiet. But he cried out even more loudly, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stood still, and he said, call him here. And they called the blind man, saying to him, take heart, get up, he's calling you. So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And then Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, my teacher, let me see again. And Jesus said to him, go, your faith has made you well. And immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. And I want to take a moment and actually just check in. When you read that story, what character in the story did you find your attention being drawn to? I'm just curious, in this room, every time I read this, I'm paying attention. There's a whole bunch of different characters in the story. Who'd you find yourself gravitating towards? Who'd you find yourself? Say again? The man. Bartimaeus? The blind man? Yeah. Who else? Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. What? Yeah, right? What a strange moment. Like, hey, sit down and be quiet. And they're like, oh, good news for you. Jesus is calling you. Let's go. Like, this just changed fast. Yeah. So paying attention to those that were around Jesus. Yeah.
Mine was the crowd.
The crowd.
No way I would have been calling Jesus if there was a big giant crowd around him. No way.
No way. Yeah. Right. That's a pretty intimidating, bold move. What else? Who else were you paying attention to? Maybe some of the same, maybe some different.
I had some the man and some Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to notice together 3 different characters in the story. And the first one is, some of you were noticing as you read through this, you were just drawn to pay attention to blind Bartimaeus. Right, which is this crazy story. Here is this blind man who's sitting by the road. There's a whole lot of movement happening around him, and he is crying out for help. He's crying out to be noticed. He's crying out to have Jesus pay attention to him. And I think in this story, one of the things that it captures is the deep longing that many of us hold to be seen. The deep longing for someone to actually stop and pay attention to us, to see where we are and to see what is happening. And I think about how hard it is to be the one who is longing to be seen and to actually ask to be seen. Like, what a risky thing that is. Right, I had a moment literally last week where I was trying to tell a story about some things that had happened in my family to some friends, and I was trying to tell it in a way that there was something in the story that I wanted. It was really important to me that this part of the story was how it was seen. And my wife was there with me with friends, and she jumped in to help me tell the story. Except the portion of the story that was important to her was different than the portion of the story that was important to me. So I'm in this moment of going, I want my friends to see this about the story. And what ended up being seen was what my wife, the portion of the story, which was also true and valid, it just was not the part of the story I wanted to be seen. And in that moment, I was not my best self. And what I actually did was I was like, fine, like let that be the story. Because it is, when there has been an overlooking, when there has been a dismissal, when there has been a moment where I have this longing to be seen, and I actually have felt overlooked, I have felt pushed to the side, it is really difficult to keep asking, hey, please stop and see me. Please stop and see me. So while there is a longing to be seen, right? In this, we are made for connection. We are created for connection with God and one another. In moments when we aren't, when that longing is not being met, there is also a natural instinct in us to move us to protect ourselves. Man, it's actually too painful to try to be seen. I've been down that road. I've tried to tell stories before. They get misunderstood. Someone else jumps in and tells my story for me, and then they don't even see who I am. I'm just going to sit quietly. I'm just going to back up. And actually, in that moment last week, if I'm honest, I tried a couple times, and then I shut down, and then I stormed off angry. If I'm just being honest about that, I was like, fine, you know what? I am literally going to leave. I will shut the whole thing down. Because trying to continue to be seen is actually really hard. So there's a longing to be seen that we see embodied in Bartimaeus. There's a risk in being overlooked. And literally, he's in this moment where the followers of Jesus are saying, we don't want to see you. Like, whew, that's a hard moment for me. That actually some of the people that I most want to be seen by are the people who actually are supposed to be the people seeing me and end up being the people who dismiss me and push me down. And so then there is this temptation that I have to protect ourselves, to protect myself, and to whether that's shut down or escape or back away. And the invitation in the way of Jesus, and I look at Bartimaeus and go, man, he took a risk again. Like he spoke up, he said, hey, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Then he was shut down, and then he chose to risk again. And I think there's some of us who are very familiar with this experience and actually have been shut down enough that we've stopped risking. Said it's not worth it. The other character in the stories, and I'm going to lump disciples and those following Jesus, because they're all standing around Jesus and they're all walking around with Jesus. And there's an element to what they're doing that makes a lot of sense to me. Like, you think about the moment that they're in where Jesus, they have devoted their lives to Jesus, and Jesus has communicated to them, hey, this run that we're on is about to end. Like, I am about to die, and the anxiety that would be. And actually, when I read the story, I think about there's probably two different dueling anxieties that the disciples have. One is they have been practicing being on mission with Jesus. Like, they are following Jesus. They are walking with Jesus. They literally have been one place to another place, walking with Jesus. They are on mission. There is purpose for them, and they are on their way to Jerusalem, also on their way to Jerusalem with a whole bunch of anxiety, like this might not go bad. There is risk, right? And in moments of danger and risk, we enter into a place where we protect ourselves. That's the biological wiring that is competing with God's created intent for us to walk in connection. And so here you have the disciples who are on mission with Jesus, walking to a place that Jesus said, this is where I want you to follow me to. And they are so focused on their own anxiety and on their own mission, they actually fail to see the people around them. That in this moment, it's almost like their mission blinded them to the people around them. And I think there is a longing in all of us for purpose and to be part of something and to be on a journey together and to follow a mission together. And there is a temptation that we would actually silence others who inhibit our forward movement because it slows the journey down. And we have this story of blind Bartimaeus sitting on the road going, will someone see me? And the disciples who are following Jesus go like, man, we got a mission. We got somewhere to be. We got something to do. Like, why don't you just sit down, stay down, be quiet. We'll pass you by. You just keep living your life. I had one of my most painful experiences in ministry. Years back, I was running some youth clubs at some local middle schools, and it was so fun. I had a barrel of, I don't even know if I'd be allowed to do this now, but I had some foam noodles, like pool noodles that I cut in half, and I put in a barrel because I had a bunch of like 6th and 7th grade boys that were bouncing off the walls after school. And so I taped the square in the middle of the cafeteria into the gym, and that was our ninja zone. And so if you walked into the ninja zone, you were fair game for noodle wars. And so kids would come in, just grab a noodle and just like slap the crap out of each other with a noodle. And it was phenomenal. Burn off some energy. They got to feel like super tough and strong, and it was wonderful. So I loved running these clubs, and I had a group of high schoolers that would come help me do it. And one of the high schoolers, his name was Michael, and he was 16, and we had walked with him through some heart issues and some heart challenges. He actually had a heart transplant due to some of his stuff that was going on. And a couple years later, I actually was doing his funeral because of some of the heart complications, so he passed away at 18. And I remember as I was preparing to give his eulogy, this moment with Jesus where Jesus drew my attention to the way that he had placed Michael in my life for me to see Michael. And I got so wrapped up in what I was trying to accomplish with these clubs, and I was pumped that I had 40% of the student body at my club hearing the stories of Jesus, which is great. It was phenomenal. It was wonderful. It wasn't a bad thing. And this moment where Jesus was like, you missed Michael. Like, you missed him. You were so excited about the vision and the dream, the journey that I was taking you on, that you actually missed the person who was standing on the side of the road going, Jesus, Son of David, would you have mercy on me? That was a really hard moment to come to realize. To come, man, my tendency to be part of something, to be part of a big vision, runs the risk that I will get consumed in that and won't see the people around me. And the invitation for us is actually to take time to listen. Not just to hear, right? Because clearly the people around Jesus heard him because they silenced him. They go, hey, stop talking. So they heard him talking. It wasn't like he was hollering and no one, it even registered. It registered, but they didn't stop and actually listen. And I want you also to notice in this story Jesus, who has all of these things going on. He's on this mission. I mean, he's holding the fact that he is headed to a spot where he is going to die. That is, if there is a moment in a season of life that we are most prone to protect ourselves, knowing that someone is about to kill me would probably be high on that list. Right? So Jesus is in a moment where we're going, like, it would make sense if he's starting to, like, protect and keep himself safe and, like, let's accomplish things and let's check off the list of things that need to be done. And Jesus is walking surrounded by this crowd. And when he heard blind Bartimaeus, the story says that Jesus stopped and stood still. He just stopped and he stood still. And then he told the disciples who had been, and Jesus is so kind because in the story, I mean, he could have reamed out his disciples going like, y'all are dumb. Like, literally, I'm here to help people. Y'all are missing. He just goes, hey, almost this like subtle, like, I just want you to know that I saw you missing this guy. Because what Jesus didn't say, he didn't say, hey, Bartimaeus, come on over here. He actually told his disciples, hey, I'm gonna let you redo this. Right, with my girls, the phrase that we use is, let's try that again. Right? Like, oh, yeah, that is not how we do it in our family. Let's try that again. Let's back this up. Let's try saying that again. Let's try engaging in that activity again. You fall down, you want to try that. So let's try it again. There's almost this moment where Jesus is going, hey, let's try this again. Hey, disciples, go bring him here. In the shift in the disciples, some of you notice are going like, oh, the very person like I've been in that moment about like going like, oh, here is someone, like I just got called out, and I'm going to engage in trying to sit and go like, maybe no one saw me do it, like maybe it can slide through, but either way, they went and they brought blind Bartimaeus. And it says Jesus stood still, and then it says that Jesus asked him a question. And the question itself is so fascinating to me because he asked Bartimaeus, what do you want me to do for you? What healing do you want? And every time I read that story, I sit and go, feel like it's fairly apparent what he would want you to do for him. Like, his name is Blind Bartimaeus. The story title is Blind Bartimaeus. It feels really obvious that it was like a simple thing. And literally, I mean, he's clearly blind, and on the side there was someone had to lead him to Jesus. So all of the evidence was there. So it would have been a simple thing. Jesus could have been like, hey, bring him here. I'm going to restore your sight. And Jesus just acts and heals. But the story says that Jesus stopped. It says that Jesus invited. And then it says that Jesus asked a question. That Jesus was curious. And as we think about the way that we are made for connection and our proneness to protect ourselves for a whole lot of different reasons, because we've risked and it's gone poorly, because we're anxious about the things that are happening, because we're caught up on mission. There's all of these really real reasons that we're going to get pulled into a spot where we protect ourselves. And what Jesus models is he stops. He just stops. So let's slow down here. We're just going to stop. Everywhere to notice what's going on, right? I mean, and we were in a crowd. I mean, Jesus stopped, and it's like I just imagine in my head like the trickle down, like, and people like 8, 10 rows back going, wait, we're slowing down. What is happening? And they have to now start to pay attention. What is happening here? So Jesus stops, and he invites, and then he asks the question, what do you want me to do for you? Because I think as humans, there is a tendency for us to assume, based upon what we're seeing and noticing, and often it's not bad data we're collecting, but that we would know the deep longings of someone's heart. So let me offer you what you need. And Jesus actually creates a moment where he says, Bartimaeus, I actually just want to see you. I want to let you tell me what matters to you. I can make some assumptions, and my assumptions in this moment probably are right. And actually, what he asked for was to have his sight restored. So it wasn't like he's like, oh, I have this other, like actually the longing that he had was what was pretty obvious. But Jesus still allowed him to bring it out and tell him. So this is where I will land the plane on this, there is a longing for many of us to be seen. Some of us have given up even trying because it's really hard sometimes. And so there's an invitation to take some risks, to actually invite other people to see us, to invite Jesus to see us. I think there's a tendency that we have sometimes to get really caught up, both in good purpose and mission, but also in our own fears and uncertainty of what is coming, that cause our vision to narrow and we miss people. And the invitation is to stop and to pay attention. And I think there is a tendency that we have to provide solutions before people ask for them. And there is an invitation for us to actually allow the people around us, for us to be curious, because in curiosity and in seeing, this is actually where connection forms. If Jesus had just said, hey, bring Bartimaeus to me, Bartimaeus, you're healed, on your way. No connection is restored in that moment. There is just a solution to a problem. What Jesus created was a moment where Bartimaeus was seen. And I often wonder what it was like for Bartimaeus that Jesus stopped, that he invited, that he was curious, and then as Bartimaeus' eyes opened, and he saw Jesus looking at him, this man who had stopped and stopped the whole crowd, who had seen him, who invited him, who was looking at him and who was curious about him. I wonder what it was like for Bartimaeus to see those eyes looking at him. So I'm going to pray and then we can go from there. But Jesus, may you strengthen us to be people who re-engage the longing in us to be seen. God, for those of us who are weary, would you strengthen us to take a risk, to keep calling out for mercy and for being seen. Jesus, for those of us who get caught up in our own fears and in our own purpose, and even the mission that you have invited us to in a way that causes us to overlook others, Jesus, would you forgive us? Jesus, would you help us to slow down, to stop, to see, to invite, to be curious? That the deep experience of connection, God, of being connected to you and being connected to one another, that you place so deep in us from the origin of time, that Jesus, you would continue to breathe life onto that place, that you would restore us and strengthen us. And Jesus, make us brave. In your name, amen.